Hi, I'm going to give you a demonstration today for a technique that I like to call light painting in Photoshop. Honestly, others might refer to this technique as dodge and burn. It accomplishes the same kind of thing, but I'm not a fan of the dodge and burn tools. I prefer this method where I use adjustment layers because they're non-destructive. We'll get into it, it'll make a lot more sense. But my workflow always starts with Lightroom, so today we'll start with Lightroom. We're going to edit this simple image of a flower here in Photoshop. But before I jump to Photoshop, there's some basic edits I always start with in Lightroom. First, I like to start with this camera calibration. The camera calibration by default is set to Adobe Standard. And if you choose a different, like camera profile, it could drastically change the image color. Now when I select on mine, you'll see a bunch of profiles in here, and that's because I've built custom ones using something called an X-Rite profile or X-Rite passport. We don't need to worry about that today. Right now what I want to look at is these ones called camera faithful, camera landscape, camera neutral, camera portrait, or camera standard. If you have a Canon, you're going to see those same camera profiles. So I've already taken a look at this image and I like the look of camera standard, so I'm going to choose that. And see how it gave us a really richer look of this image, and I haven't even started editing it yet. Next, I always apply a lens correction. So I apply the profile correction and remove chromatic aberration. And then finally I finish it off with some basic edits. Now if you don't like how Lightroom is opening all these panels, and personally I don't like that. I like to change the default on that to solo mode. So if you control click in one of these tabs here, you'll see solo mode. And when you're in solo mode, only one of these can be open at a time. So if I come back up here to basic, we'll just see the basic panel. And I prefer this workspace much better. So in the basic mode, I'm just going to do some really basic edits looking at the histogram. I know I'm going to be editing this image much further in Photoshop, so I'm not going to try and take it too far. But I'm looking at the histogram here, and it doesn't really have a highlight. So I might start by bringing the whites up just a little bit. I'm not going to take it all away because I know I'm going to take it further once I get into Photoshop. So I might just take it a little bit of the way. Make sure that my clipping warnings are on. And we do that with the J key. So that's off, and now they're on. If I take this all the way up, you'll see some highlights start to clip out. So I'm going to back this down quite a bit. On the opposite end, I want to make sure that I haven't plugged up any blacks, and the clipping warning's on. It's not showing me any clipping. I might open the shadows a little bit and maybe add a little bit of clarity. And sometimes when you add clarity, that might clip the blacks. Looks like we're pretty good. I'll take the black down a little bit. Now we see that clipping warning. I'm going to back up until that's completely gone. And the last thing I want to do is crop this image into a simple square with the flower right in the center of it. So I'm going to go to the crop tool here. And then on the right hand side here where it says original, if I click and hold down, we have the option to go 1:1. And that's what I want to do is a square. Now when I use the square format, I like things to be centered. That's important to me when I use a square format. So this grid is a nice guide and it shows me that I'm not centered. So I'm going to adjust this a little bit, maybe slide this over and get the center of the flower right into the center of the square. I'm going to slide this crop up a little bit too to make sure that I'm centered top and bottom. So I'm looking at the center of this guide and I'm looking all the way around. And once I'm happy with it, I'm just going to click done. To get this image open in Photoshop, I'm going to do a Command E on my Mac, and that would be a Control E on your PC. Now that we have this image open in Photoshop, the first thing we need to do is save it. If you just do a Command or a Control S, Photoshop will just save a TIFF file automatically and rename it to say edit.tiff. I prefer to name or to save my images, my working images, as Photoshop files. So I'm going to do a file save as. Then I want to make sure the format is set to Photoshop. You can save them as TIFFs, Personally, I like all my working files to be Photoshop files because I know without opening the file, if it has the extension .psd, I know it has layers. So that's my personal workflow. If it has the extension .tiff, then for me that means it's flattened. So I'm going to save it as a Photoshop format, and I can rename it at this time. Just call it flower. I like to keep the original image number in case I want to easily find it back in my Lightroom catalog. And then I'll just say save. And the name's changed up here now. Now the fun begins. So I'm going to paint this image. I'm going to paint areas to be darker, and I'm going to paint areas to be lighter. Basically, I'm going to sculpt the light in it, because right now it's just a pretty picture of a flower, but it's otherwise fairly dull. So let's look at what we have and talk through what might help the image. If you look at the background, it's kind of distracting. It's nice and blurry, but it's still kind of distracting. I'd like it to be darker than the foreground, and that'll bring the flower out. Now we could have put an edge vignette on in Lightroom, but we don't really have any control of how that edge vignette, it's just kind of an even circle all the way around. So this way is so much more fun because you can paint it in, and I really do think of painting my images when I do this. So I like to use adjustment layers, and my favorite adjustment layer is the curves. You can add a curves adjustment from the adjustment panel. You have all these icons here. Sometimes I find it a little bit challenging to remember what the icons are. If you hover over the curve one, it'll say. I usually go to the bottom of the layers panel, choose this icon here that's half black and half white, and that gives me a list. So I'm going to go to curves. Now when the curves adjustment layer is added, nothing changes in our view here because we actually have to move the curve to change the image. So think of the curve as a light switch. If you pull it up, you're going to add light. If you pull it down, you're going to take away light. So you can click anywhere in the middle of this curve. Go down, it's going to get dark. Go up, it's going to get light. Now I want to make this really dark. Actually, I want to start at the end point. If you want to remove a point you've already added, you can just click and drag it off and it'll go away. I'm going to take this start point, which represents white in the image, and I'm going to pull it way down. And it's looking pretty ugly, right? I'm going to pull this middle down too. I'm going to go really dark with this. And I don't care if it goes too far because we're going to softly paint this in. I intentionally go past where is the right amount. And I'm just looking at the background on here. And I'm looking at this light, these light areas in here, and how they're kind of distracting. And I can make those areas even darker by moving the start point. If I pull this start point, it's going to take those down even further. So I've really pulled that back. Now what I want to do is I want to paint in this edit. So let's take a look at the adjustment layer here. It automatically has a mask on it. This white area is the mask. Now the mask is white, and you can think of that as a window shade that's pulled up. So all of the light, or in this case it's like black light we're shining on it, is being filled or applied to the layer that's below. So what we want to do is reverse that so it's all blocked. If you click right on the layer mask, you get the layer mask properties and then an invert button here. So now the mask went to black, and now it's completely hiding the curves edit. And we can't see any change. If I invert this back, we'll see the curves edit because it's being revealed by a white mask. If we invert it, now we have a black mask and it's being hidden. So what I want to do is I want to paint in my edit. I can actually paint right on the layer mask. But what I need to do is go to the brush tool, and right now I'm in the move tool. So I can get to the brush tool with a B on my keyboard, which jumps me to the brush tool. And I need to adjust my brush. Now I'll tell you I'm using a Wacom Intuos. If you're going to use this technique, you absolutely have to have a pressure sensitive tablet. It's what gives you that ability to actually paint. And this right up here, this says that pressure sensitivity is turned on for my tablet. If I turn that off, it would be like painting with a mouse, which to me is like painting with a brick. So we're not going to do that. So I have my my Wacom program so that I can adjust my brush and opacity up and down. If you don't have that programmed, you can click on it here. We want zero hardness and something really big, maybe almost that big to start. And I want to set my opacity pretty low. I like 30%. You can jump to an opacity with a number on your keyboard. If I type the 0, it's going to change this to 100%. If I type the 3, it jumps it back to 30%. So now I need to look at what color I'm painting, because my mask is already black and my foreground color is black. So if I painted right now, nothing would happen. I need to switch my colors around so that I'm painting on white, because white is going to reveal. So I'll use the X key. So now I have white color for my brush and a pretty light opacity, and I can just start lightly painting around the edge. And this is so fun. It's so like you just can't screw up, right? That's the way I look at it. I feel like I'm painting my image. Maybe I was supposed to be a painter in my life, and I never really quite got there, so I paint my photographs instead. So you can just slowly build this in. Now you don't have to have any special skills. You don't have to make any selections to do this. Just nice, big, soft, feathered brush and start building this up. I want my corners to be the darkest, so I'm going to go over them a few times. Maybe this area up here, down here in this corner, and see where we're at. If I Option or Alt click on my layer mask, you'll see what I've painted here. Now I know some of you are thinking, oh no, you painted over the flower petals. That looks terrible. Well, we'll just paint them back in. So I'm going to zoom in on the petal down here, and I use the Command spacebar to get my zoom tool, and then I use the scrubby zoom. So we'll get down here, and I'm going to switch my brush color now to black. So I'm on white. I'm going to switch to black with the X key, and then I'm going to make my brush size a little bit smaller and start painting those leaves back in, or the petals back in. And I can just slowly build it in. I can go over the areas that I want to be bright, maybe leave a little bit of shade in the corners. And I use my space bar to get the hand tool to move. And I'll just quickly go around this. You know, don't have to be too picky about it. You got a nice big soft brush with a light opacity. It feels very playful and very natural to paint this way. And I'm doing this maybe a little bit faster than I might for just the sake of the tutorial, but it's still looking pretty good. So we'll get in here, paint this out. If I go over it, if I paint a second time over it, it'll get a little bit brighter, because what I'm doing is I'm painting with black at an opacity of 30%. Let's look at the mask again. So as I paint over that area, it starts building up, and then I'm blocking the dark curves at it and revealing the original brighter color of that flower. Let's get all the way down into here. And if I get where maybe I went too far on the outside, I can just switch my color around again to white, which is going to reveal the dark, and I can just work that back in. Maybe go with a smaller brush. See, it's really handy when you have your Wacom program to do that, because I can just keep adjusting my brush size as I go. We'll keep painting this in and work our way all the way around here. Maybe make my brush a little bit bigger to get in here. Now the really nice thing with a pressure sensitive brush is that if I put just a little bit of pressure, I end up getting a small brush, and as I push down harder, I can paint a broader area. So that allows me to go from the tip of this all the way out to the broad area of the petal. Now over here, it looks like maybe I went a little bit too far. Sometimes if I went too far, instead of painting it in, I'll switch over to this finger smudge tool, and I'll just smudge the mask back in. I like the way that that works sometimes too. So let's go back to full picture, which is Command or Control 0, and turn the visibility on and off of this and see where we're getting. Quite a big difference. I still don't really like some of the tips of these being black, so I'll go back to my brush tool and paint these areas a little bit more. So when I do that before and after, here I get a nice view of exactly where I've kind of missed and where I need to go back into. So what do you think? We're getting there. So I've put a little bit more time into painting this layer mask, and I'm pretty happy with the way it's looking now. Now remember, this is completely non-destructive. If I turn the visibility off, our original image is still here, completely intact. If I turn this back on, we can see the edit. If I Option or Alt click on the layer mask, we can see what it looks like. Basically, everything that's white here is revealing the curve which made the background darker. And this is why I like to use this instead of burn and dodge, because it's completely non-destructive and I have the ability to change my mind maybe. Maybe I feel like this was too dark. I could just change the opacity of the adjustment layer. And if I click right on the word opacity right here, I get the scrubby, and I could take this down. So I could lighten my overall edit simply by changing the opacity of the adjustment layer. Let's take this all the way back up, because the other option I have is to go back to the curve by double clicking on the curve part of the adjustment layer, brings up the properties, and I could decide that maybe I went too far and I could brighten it back up here, or I can decide maybe I want to even go darker. So I have full flexibility to come back and change the way this is burned in here. And I like having that kind of flexibility. Let's take this up just a little bit, maybe back in there. And if I click this arrow here, that will close. So let's keep going with this image. The background's looking a lot better, but now I want to sculpt the flower itself. I like this center part. I want that to be the focal point. So the brightest thing in the image is where your viewer is going to look first. So I want to brighten this area. Let's zoom in on a bit. I want to brighten it, but I don't want to brighten the dark areas. So let's add another curves layer. And I'll start from the start point here, and I'll move this up or to the left, which is going to brighten the brightest areas of the image. And all I care about, all I'm looking at here is this area right here. I don't care what's happening out here, because that's going to be covered up with the layer mask. I only care what's happening in here. I might even take this up a little bit and take the darker areas back down so they're not getting too light. And then I'll click on the layer mask. Changes the properties panel to the layer mask. Click the invert. Make sure my brush or my brush is set to white, not black. So I'm going to hit the X key. And make sure my opacity is fairly light. Right now it's at 40%, and that's fine. And I think I'll go even a little bit bigger here. And then I'm just gonna paint light. So I'm just painting a spotlight right on the area where I want it to be brighter. Let's turn the visibility on and off and see how much that helps there. Big difference. Simple, simple edit. Well, let's keep going further. I like this pattern outside, and I want to brighten it so that we see it better. So I'm going to add another curves. And again, I'm going to take the start point up. But I really want to keep contrast in here. See how this is starting to flatten out in this area? I'm not really liking that. Again, I'm only looking at this area of the image when I move these curves, because that's what I'm going to paint back in. So I'm going to take this dark area back down, which should start darkening this. And we'll take the bright area back up, and this will give us some contrast in that area. Now, one of the things I noticed though is that it's making this area more saturated. And I really don't like how it's changing that to the pink red color from where it was originally. Let's turn this on and off so you can see. See, I'm not really reading that as a saturated color until I brighten it, and I'm not really liking how that looks. Well, with the adjustment layers, we can change their blend mode. And if you change the blend mode to luminosity, it will only affect the luminosity and not the colors. And so again, maybe we don't like what's happening out here, but that doesn't matter because I only care about this shape inside of here. This is where I'm going to paint it in, and I'm really liking this. So again, I'll click on my layer mask, click invert, make sure I have a white brush, opacity of 40 is fine. And actually, maybe I'm going to take my opacity up to 70. So I just hit the 7 on my keyboard, and I'm just going to start painting these areas in. Maybe take my brush down a little bit. Now, as I paint over these, the layer mask is going to get whiter. See that? So if I paint over this one time, this isn't as bright as that. But if I paint over it a second time, it'll get brighter because I'm adding 70% on top of 70%, which gives us the ability to kind of feather that in. And I'm liking this. See how we're getting more contrast in there? I'm really liking that contrast. And I'll go all the way around. And then I'll zoom back out, Command 0, close this up, and then see how this looks overall. So I see that I kind of went too far in this area here. So I'm going to switch to black, and I'm going to cover this back up. Now remember, the inner bright was on a separate layer. Again, this is why I love using adjustment layers instead of using Burge and Dodge and Burn, because I can separate them and I have way more control. So I'm really liking how this is going. Okay, I want to finish this off now by sculpting the petals. I really like these light areas, these streaks in here, and I want to accentuate that with this same technique. Usually when I'm painting an image, I will look at what's already there and I'll accentuate what I like about it. So I like these kinds of painted light stripes that are going through here. So I'm going to add another curves layer, and I'll just brighten it overall. And we'll go pretty bright, brighter than we need to. Then I'll invert the layer mask. Now I've been showing you that you can click the invert button, but Command or Control I will also invert the mask as long as you're selected on the layer mask. So I need to switch my brush color back to white, and I'm going to zoom in using the scrubby zoom and set my opacity, I think, to 40% for the brush and go a little bit smaller. And then I'm just going to paint light in like this. See, I'm just basically painting what's already there. Yeah, I went too far here. No problem. I will switch to the black and I'll paint that back out. And I can go back over the areas that I painted with black and then switch to white and paint white in. So let's basically I'm following the light that's already there. And if I'm not liking it, I just switch to black and I blend it back in. And I'm going to move around the flower and do this. I'm going to go all the way around it, painting in this light that I like. Back and forth, black to white. Right now I'm painting with black. I'm covering up the ends of that. I'm going to switch to white. I'm going to paint that highlight in. I'm going to switch to black, and I'm going to feather it in there. And then maybe on this petal, I'll paint this edge here with a little bit of light. But I'll leave the inside of it here. I'm switching to black to cover this up. I'll leave this darker so that I get more of a layered look. Then I'll come and I'll add some light to this top petal, and then it'll really come forward off of that petal behind there. And I'll switch my color to black and I'll paint this back in. Switch it back to white, add a little highlight in this area, switch it back to black to blend that in. Get this edge here, go to black to blend it back in. So I'm just going back and forth. I'm going to go all the way around. All right, I've gone all the way around this flower and painted light on all the petals. Let's see where we're at with it. If I click the visibility on and off, you can see how we're just getting these highlights to pop off of there. If I Option or Alt click on the layer mask, you can see that it's just a really rough, loosely painted mask that's allowing that light to come through. It's not pretty, but it works. You can't see all those edges because they're real soft. So I'm going to do a overall before and after. I'll zoom out on this a little bit so we can see the whole thing. The easy way to do an overall before and after is to do an Option or Alt click right on the visibility of the bottom layer. So that's what we started with, and this is where we're at. Pretty dramatic change. Now that I'm looking at the before and after, I'm feeling like the background went too far. But that's okay. I often will push something too far so that I know when I've gone too far and then I can back up. So I'm going to select this background layer and I'm going to take the opacity down. I'm going to just drop it back to where it's looking a little bit more realistic to me. And I'm liking that a little bit better. I still want my outer edges to be darker though. I really want that vignette look, but I didn't want it coming all the way into the petals. So I'm going to add another curves layer. And because I have this first one selected, when I click New Adjustment Layer, it'll go right on top. But before I do that, another good idea for workflow is to rename these. So it just says Curves 1, Curves 2, Curves 3. And I can just rename this to Background, which is always a good idea to keep your files nice and tidy. So this is Background. I'm going to say Curves. And I'm really going to darken this on both ends. Just going to make it black, almost completely black. And then I'll invert this and have a nice big feathered brush. We'll just go to 20% on this one. Painting with white, and I'm just going to lightly hit these corners and darken them in. And I really like this technique for edge vignetting because you have a lot more control. I'm making my brush a little bit smaller so I can get into this area without going over the flower. But this is so much better than using just a oval vignette from Lightroom. I'm going to switch my color back to black and come back this up a little bit. So now let's do an overall before and after. Oh, it's really looking nice now. There's one more thing I want to do to it. I really like how the tips of the flowers are bright, like it's an explosion. I like how it's bright in the center, and I like how it's bright around the outer circumference of the flower. But I want to accentuate that by darkening this area right around here, just slightly, really, really slightly. So I'm going to go back up to the top layer and say New Curves Adjustment Layer, and just pull this 3/4 tone area down a little bit. And I'm actually going to change this to luminosity because I'm not liking how it's making it really red in there. I just wanted to darken it down a little bit. So we'll invert this, make sure our brush is set to white. Now I'm just going to lightly paint in this inner part that's darker. Just real light. You probably don't even see anything at first. If we look at the layer mask, we can see that it's really light because I had the brush set to 20%. Let's see if we can see a change by turning the visibility on and off. And we need to go a little bit further. So I'll go around this again and see where I'm at. It's starting to darken up. Let's adjust the curve itself because I really want to lightly feather that in. And again, this is why this method is so powerful because you have so much flexibility. There, that's what I was looking for. See how it's just slightly darker in there. So let's look at the whole before and after again. If I Option or Control click, that's where we started. Nice, pretty picture of a flower, but really not so special. And with light painting, we've made a really dramatic image controlling the way the light falls across the scene. And I'll tell you, I do this with every one of my photographs that I've deemed good enough to print. If it's going to go to print, it's going to get some of this attention. Maybe not to this extreme, but to some level, I'm going to go in and paint my shadows in and paint my highlights in. It works great on hair for portraits or clothing to accentuate the folds. So give it a try on your next image. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Thanks for watching.